Konnichiwa. Today, we're going to talk about an unusual but not uncommon element of Japanese that you'll certainly come across in your immersion. It can be confusing because nobody really explains exactly what it is and what it does, and of course, certainly don't explain why. A number of people have asked me about this recently, including my Red Kokeshi patron, Bob Nagler, who says, "Have you ever done a video of verb plus mai? I've not found a very useful explanation anywhere. Only lists of examples and translation that give somewhat of an idea." Well, yes, that is pretty much the state of play. So, let's do the video now. Mai is a negative helper, like zu and nu, which I did a video on quite recently, and like them, it's something of a fossil. One of those elements that's not quite at home in modern Japanese, but it's used quite a lot, so we need to understand it. The first unusual thing about it is that unlike most helper, it doesn't attach to one of the verb stems. It gets stuck right onto the end of the verb in most cases. So if we want to push it onto iku, we just say ikumai. This is always the case with go-down verbs because there's no other way of attaching mai. With ichidan verbs, we can attach it to the universal ichidan stem. As you know, with ichidan verbs, we always, whatever we're doing with them, we always just take off the ru and put on whatever we want to put on. So, example, miru can become nimai, but just as often as minumai. The two irregulars kuru and suru, they can be kurumai and surumai, but they can also be komai and shimai. Now, strictly speaking, certainly in the past, using ichidan verbs in their entirety with mai on the end was probably ungrammatical, but now it's so widely done that it's generally accepted. You'll see it everywhere on the television news or anywhere. So what is this mai? Well, it's really a sort of sister to the helper adjective nai, which is the negativizing adjective. What's the difference between mai and nai, apart from the way it attaches? Well, what mai actually is the volitional form. Now, adjectives don't usually have volitional forms, but in this case we do. It has certain uses. Like nai, mai is an adjective, but unlike nai, and just about every other adjective, it doesn't morph in any way. You don't say makute, like maggot, but you only ever use it in its simple, unchanged form, mai, so it is, in a way, a static element in Japanese, not an active element. And this actually is quite natural, because it's the same with the positive volitional, isn't it? We have forms and past forms of helpers, like receptive and the causative, and of course, nai itself, but we don't have past and forms, etc. of the volitional tabeyo. You don't put that into the past, it doesn't have a te form, because that doesn't really make any sense with a volitional. So what does the negative volitional actually do? It doesn't do all the things that the positive volitional does. You can't use it as a call to action. Ikimashou, let's go. You can't say ikumai, let's not go. Doesn't mean that. You can't use it for, as I've shown in another video, forming a construction. That means try to do something. So you can't use mai in let's try not to do type constructions. Its uses are pretty limited. It has a couple of direct uses and then a couple of other uses which are really quite useful. So let's look at them. Its most usual use by a long way is saying that something is unlikely. It's a volitional negative. So just in the same way that we can voice conjectures or assessment, and this is very often used with aru. So we say arumai, sonnakuto, where arumai. It's just not likely. I don't think such a thing is probable at all. But it works just the same with any other verb. Hono furi de wa, keri wa, or mai. This downpour, I know to feel tam. And this is rather related to the other adjectives of subjectivity that we've discussed elsewhere now. beneath that, such as oshi, which represents our desire for something, or kawaii, which represents our fear of something. As usual, these adjectives are pointed at the thing that we desire, that we fear, etc. And in this case, they're pointed at the thing that we consider unlikely. It represents really our subjectivity about the likelihood of something. We want to give an exact Japanese equivalent. Arumai is directly equivalent to nai daro. Doesn't exist. I conjecture. Or nai desho and iwa. Arumai is directly equivalent to iwa nai daro, iwa nai desho, janai daro, janai desho. In other words, A isn't B. I would conjecture it seems likely, etc. And the interesting point here is that, as we see, with this conjectural use of the relational in its positive, more usual form, we don't attach the relational directly to the verb that we're conjecturing about. So we don't say, Sakura wa sugu ni tairo. That doesn't mean Aikuro probably can. We say, Sakura wa sugu ni kuru daisho, or daro, because that's the way we do it. We do it with the positional copula when we're making that kind of conjecture. But with mai, we can attach it directly to the verb, as we did in the previous examples. Sonna koto wa haru mai is directly equivalent to sonna koto wa nai desho. And there's no room for ambiguity here, because mai has a more limited range of meanings, as we've just discussed, than the positive volitional has. So we're not going to get confused with, say, a call to action, because mai doesn't do calls to inaction. So the most common use of mai is as the negative adjectival of these desho, dero, conjectural constructions. However, it is also used one other negativizing structure that is directly equivalent to the positive, where we can say, Rido to iku mai. I won't go there again, literally, I won't go a second time. Without the other common meaning, when it's not expressing a likelihood or possibility, it's expressing a strong decision or determination not to do something. Now, beyond these two uses, there are also a couple of other common constructions in which mai is used, and you're pretty much certain to hear these. One uses the positive and negative volitional forms together, meaning whether the verb is done or not. So, for example, iko da itu mai ka, whereas whether I go or not. Now, this is very similar to a construction that we've talked about before and that you probably know already, iku kado ka, which means literally whether I go or how, which in more natural English would be whether I go or what. Now the other construction that you'll commonly hear is formed by simply attaching shi, which is used for listing causes of something, but as we've discussed elsewhere, it's often used on its own just to imply a continuing list. And this gives a construction that's somewhat comparable to the it isn't as if or it isn't like construction in English. So if we say, Kanimochi iwa arumaishi, which is roughly equivalent to saying in English, it's not as if we're rich. Or, sekai ga uberu ba arumaishi, it's not as if the world is going to end. That's how we put it in English. In Japanese, it's more like saying, it isn't that we're rich or something like that. That's a she, that's something like that. And a volitional is again marking a negative hypothetical. Someone might act as if the world were going to end, but in fact it probably isn't. It might look to some people as if we're rich, but, well, we don't seem to be, do we? So this is how the mai helper works in its various different common uses. If you've seen any other uses and would like to discuss them, please put it in the comments below. And if you'd like me to talk about any other elements of Japanese that you find confusing, please put that in the comments below as well. And of course, if you have any general comments or questions, those go in the same place. I'd like to thank my gold Kokeshi patrons, my producer angels who make these videos possible, and all my producer angels, my red Kokeshis, my blue Kokeshis, my pink Kokeshis. Thank you. all of you, and everyone who supports this channel in various ways, watching, liking, subscribing, and most important of all, learning from the channel, and perhaps sharing it with friends and others who are learning Japanese. And I'd like to thank you for attending this lesson. これからもよろしくお願いします。Trust is myth.